Welcome back to the ER Walren Clinical Skills Building. I am still Kenneth Connell, and I'm still Deputy Dean of Research and Outreach in the Faculty of Medical Sciences. But our panel has changed, and I'm going to introduce you to them shortly. We are in the UWI building in our 60th anniversary year. The university has several events occurring during the year, including our signature event, the Principals Gala, which is on October 14th at the Cave Hill campus. Tickets are available in the bookshop for a small contribution of only 500 Barbados. We want to all of you to join us at the Black Tie Affair on campus on October 14th. And now on to a hot topic, which is climate change, planetary, and population health. You heard about population health this morning with our panelists. This afternoon, it's still in hot Barbados. We continue with planetary health. The gentlemen to my left are as follows. Immediate left, Dr. Kirk Douglas, the director of the Center for Biosecurity, Biosecurity Studies, Dr. David Yawson, the director of the Center for Resource Management and Environmental Studies. And to his left, Dr. Karl Payne, lecturer in, and I always get this wrong, Karl, Water Resources Management. I'm not sure why I get that wrong, because it's pretty easy. So we get to discuss the environment, the impact of climate change on our environment. We heard the organism causing most of the damage this morning is actually us humans in the animal kingdom. And concepts such as the One Health approach came out. So I'm going to let you gentlemen start with opening shots of 5 minutes each to get started. That's 300 seconds, Kirk, to get started with your opening thoughts. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks very much, Dr. Connell. And yes, this is a hot topic. And right on cue, what I would like to flag in terms of the environmental impact would be wildfires. Wildfires in Barbados, even though this is not something that is current, this is something that we have to look forward to every dry season, and it will get worse potentially. So we have to find mitigative actions and plans to put in place. Now, with wildfires comes the impact of air pollution. Now, the WHO has released statistics that show 7 million people, that's 7 million people die every single year due to air pollution. That's from simply breathing poor quality air. It's a staggering statistic compared to COVID-19. COVID-19 has not killed over 7 million people to date. So over the 3 years of the pandemic, 21 million people would have died due to just simply breathing poor quality air. So within Barbados, we know there are several sources of air pollution. Wildfires is one of them, but we have in terms of the vehicular pollution that comes from them, and also from people burning garbage, which is a pet peeve of several people who live on the island. So we have to look at our anthropogenic impacts, because within biosecurity you have the infrastructural risk, you have the environmental risk, but the human risk is the one that I don't think we quite appreciate. That is something that we have to tackle. That is something that we have to turn our attention to, because it's intricately linked to the NCD problem as well that we have, because inhaling poor quality air increases your risks of strokes, hypertension, cardiovascular events, and also diabetes. So it is not just a fire. It is actually impacting on several people's health. So on that note, I'll pass over to my colleague, or back to the chair, sorry.
No, you can pass it on. I'm just pleased that you stuck within 5 minutes. So you can go right ahead. David, take it from there. Food security, by the way, came up a lot this morning in the conversation. Go right ahead.
All right, thank you very much. I'll be talking about food. I'm interested in food, and that is not to hide the fact that I like food myself. And I'm an African, and so when it comes to matters of food, you cannot, you cannot fault me on that. Food availability in sufficient quantities is important for food security. It undergirds our nutrition. And nutrition is an important determinant of health. And so should we care about how food production, food supply, food consumption will pan out under climate change? I want us to focus on 3 key questions. Number 1 is, what are we eating as Caribbeans? Number 2 is, what are we importing as Caribbeans? And number 3 is, should we care about what happens to key food commodities under climate change in countries beyond our borders? The transnational impact of climate change. Should we care about that? And should we consider that in our climate change adaptation measures or strategies? The first question, what are we eating? And I will answer this by looking at 2 key components of food consumption. Number 1 is dietary energy. What do we eat to give us energy? In the Caribbean, the largest source of dietary energy is wheat and products. And just the refreshment we had just now will tell you that almost everything there comes from wheat in one way or another. So wheat and products constitute the largest source of dietary energy in the Caribbean. This is followed by potatoes and products. Then rice, corn, and then poultry meat. The next thing is, what is the largest source of protein in the Caribbean? It is poultry meat. And so in terms of food security, we have to think about these key commodities. My second question is, what are we importing? You can begin to think about how much of these key commodities we produce. How much of wheat do we produce in the Caribbean? Perhaps none. How much of corn do we produce? Perhaps a little. How much potatoes do we produce? Perhaps a little. Chicken, meat? Yes, we're doing quite well in that space. But the question is, what are we importing? The largest primary food commodity in terms of quantity that we import to the Caribbean is corn. And if we want to reduce food import bill, that is the area we will want to look at. Annually, we are importing approximately 3 million tons of corn. But throughout the Caribbean, we are producing only about 300 to 400,000 tons of corn. Not a quarter of what we import or the quantity we consume. So there is that gap there. And what we use that corn for, depending on the country, about 50 to 80% of that goes into feed use, animal feed, to feed mostly monogastrics, perhaps pigs and poultry. My third question is, should we care about what happens in other countries under climate change in terms of the production of key food commodities? And my answer is yes, we should. Because where does the corn we import come from? For most Caribbean countries, including Barbados, about 80 to 99% of the corn we import comes from USA alone, a single country. Canada is important for only Dominica. Argentina is important for Cuba. But for the rest of us, the USA is our largest source of corn. For some countries, 99% of their corn import comes from the USA. And so we should care about how corn production pans out under climate change in the USA. Studies suggest that due to warmer temperatures, the USA and the top 10 corn-producing countries, which currently import less than 5% of corn, the top 10 countries currently import less than 5% of corn, except Mexico. Under warmer climate change conditions, these countries will have deficits in excess of 30%. That means they will not have enough to feed their own populations, let alone to be able to have surplus for export. My question is, how would the Caribbean fare? Would we be eating chicken? We should be concerned about that, and we should account for those transnational impacts in our climate change adaptation strategies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. And Karl?
Well, you can't talk about food security without obviously talking about water.
Water, yeah.
And Dr. Connell, as you alluded to, with this heat, you need to stay hydrated.
Mm-hmm.
But what exactly is climate change and the climate crisis going to do to water availability? And by 2050, the projections are that there's going to be about 10% less rainfall, and Barbados is already water scarce, facing severe challenges and intermittent supply. So what are the ramifications? What are the implications there in terms of the supply? The other issue I wanted to flag is that when the rain does fall, it will be more intense rainfall events. So a lot less water available and percolating in our aquifers underground, and there's going to be more flooding. And of course, flooding and stagnant water and so on, that has health implications, of course. And so that's on the supply side. So that's the first issue I wanted to flag. Then there's the demand side. So if we are to manage and extricate ourselves from this crisis, we need to make sure that we're aligning what we do on the supply side and the demand side. But look, I mean, it's clear to see. If it's hotter, people will have a proclivity to drink more water. So it means that the demand is greater. There's also the issue of infrastructural issues that will exacerbate the climate crisis. Non-revenue water, which is just a term that encompasses leakages, and in this part of the world, we're somewhere up in 50%. We have 20 times the burst rate for our water infrastructure here. So through losses, we need to really fix that situation and suppress that demand. And then we need to think about basic messaging once again. That was alluded to in the earlier panel, and behavioral change to conserve a lot more water so we don't face more and more issues there. Then the other thing is water quality. So if you drive to St. Lucie, you see these water tankers all the time, and people complain they're paying a water bill, yet still I have brown water, I have salty water.
Yeah.
Sea level rise is another implication of climate change, and that will be inextricably linked to higher salinity levels, but also it takes rainfall to flush out that salty water. So if you're getting less rainfall, right, to displace that salt water, it means the water quality will be degraded as a consequence of climate change. So it's really a crisis of extraordinary proportions, and I'm glad from the outset, Dr. Connell, you said it is a matter of a civilization, Caribbean civilization matter, which I think it is. And then we need to think carefully about the solutions. How do we have great ideas. The Roofs to Reefs project is and Barbados has some of the most ambitious goals by 2030 for full renewable energy, so on and so forth. But how do we get there? And it really needs some bold ideas, which I think we're seeing. I know we're seeing on the national and global stage in terms of the Bridgetown Initiative, so on and
Right.
so forth.
Yeah.
So we really need to get to solutions if we're going to fix this crisis, which cuts across food security, wildfires. Obviously, you need water to out the fires, and then
Of course. And
water
health.
integrated with the One Health approach.
Yeah, yeah. You know, water quality is something that's very close to my mouth because, every week I have to spend quite a lot of additional money buying bottled water because the water where I live tastes horrible. And although it's meant to be potable water, I can't consume it even with filters. And every time I dump a plastic bottle in the bin, I think, here's another piece of plastic being thrown away, adding to the environment some more. But then a lot of people outside of Barbados say to me, how could you guys have a water problem? You're surrounded by water. So what do you think is the role of desalination in all this?
Very interesting question. I think there is a role for desalination. Actually, the first desal plant was really came about as a result of a water crisis in the 1990s.
Yeah.
And so that was the reason for the desalination plant, the ionics plant on Spring Garden.
Garden.
And so that helps to supplement the supply by the BWA and groundwater.
Mhm.
The issue, though, is that the water from the desalination plant, is more expensive than potable water from pump
So that
from
means higher water
aquifers.
bills.
So it may mean higher water bills.
Yeah.
So there's always a trade-off, but it may be a climate resilient strategy in terms of seeing the writing on the wall with less, a dwindling water supply. The other issue is that it's energy intensive. So it means then that there needs to be this nexus between water and energy, perhaps making a case for more renewable energy
Right.
in the water sector. And then the other issue I would like to flag is that you remove the salt from water, but then where does that salt go? Are we creating some environmental impact to marine life?
To marine life.
Right,
Yeah.
down the road.
Yeah.
So while that may be a potential solution, I've flagged a few of the trade-offs, and I know there are going to be efforts on the West Coast because there's increasing evidence that not only do you remove salt from the water, but nitrates. And nitrates are a huge problem because not only do they cause eutrophication, so nutrient-rich conditions and algal growth around our coral reefs, and we don't have an economy if we don't have healthy coral reefs. But Dr. Douglas and I started to look into some of the health impacts and linkages between nitrate-rich water and health effects. But obviously, that would need longer-term epidemiological studies to really to tease out the relationship between the two.
I'm really curious about that, Kirk. What kind of stuff have you guys been looking at?
Sorry. So where nitrates are concerned, there's actually a study that we had looked at in Trinidad and Tobago where they were looking at gastroenteritis cases. So
Right.
they examined these gastroenteritis cases to look for pathogens. In almost 60% of those cases, they could not find an identifiable pathogen. Now, it could be the limitation of the test, but it could also be, as Dr. Payne quite rightly mentioned, the issue of chemical pollution within our waters. High levels of nitrates will give you a very severe course of gastroenteritis without the presence of any type of pathogen. This is not only for Barbados or the Caribbean, but there are studies from Norway, studies from India that show that this causes it. One of the other health implications, especially for pregnant women, is that they can develop what they call blue baby syndrome, where the babies are born blue because of oxygen deprivation during the course of pregnancy. So there are a lot of cascading impacts that our human use, because life on land influences the quality of water on the ground, as Dr. Payne would tell you, and it also influences in terms of agriculture and food production, because that is a major source of the nitrates that we would see in the groundwater in terms of either the manures that are taken from poultry and the other agriculture industries, or even the inorganic fertilizers. So I think it was Dr. Harewood that mentioned the ecosystem and the interconnectivity in the previous session, and that bears evidence within the One Health concept, the link between health and the environment, because whatever action you take here will have a ripple effect right through.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. I mean, I had no idea you guys were doing that kind of work. And David, over the semi-healthy refreshment break, we were discussing the fact that the average person is probably not going to be concerned about food security until their favorite item is unavailable in the supermarket. And they just can't get it, because as a population, we just don't see food security until there really is food scarcity, right? And so, but talk to me, that we are a chicken-loving kind of country. We're a very chicken-loving kind of country. This is going to change our diet completely and possibly. And you mentioned a climate in terms of, the environmental climate, but our world is also in a very much a geopolitically turbulent climate. Our main source of corn, it could possibly be at war with another country tomorrow. Not literally, but you know what I mean. So how are these things kind of factors that influence our own food security? Because what you described sounded like a long-term thing, but it could actually happen next month, 2 months from now, kind of depending on what event occurs.
Thanks very much. And I think you hit the nail on the head. I recently published a paper in which I called for diversification. First in the sources of corn to the Caribbean, but also there is a need to look for alternatives, not just alternative sources, but alternatives to corn as feed material. There are many other Barbados. As I walk around or drive around, as soon as you get
You
one
can't walk
rain,
around now.
once you get one drop of rain, you see the grass is up.
Yes.
Yeah. And so it's a place that
Fertile.
supports grass very well. And so some cereals which belong to the grass family should do well here.
Right.
And there are certain cereal crops that can easily substitute for corn in animal feed. But at the moment, they are orphan crops. Sorghum, millet,
Right.
can do well, potentially in Barbados and or in the Caribbean. And these are orphan crops that we can begin to look into as substitutes for corn. It's true that it is not just a matter of war, but also when you are actually under that condition of deficit.
Right.
As a strong trading country, the United States will first and foremost look at the most influential and most important trading partners. And the total Caribbean import actually accounts for less than 2% of total U.S. corn exports. Even if we accumulate our import and do bulk import, which should give us some economic leverage, we are still a small
Right.
trading partner in this sense. And so we should be more proactive to begin to look at which other sources we can get this from. Where can we grow some of these ingredients ourselves? So for example, Suriname, Guyana, Belize, which is now the largest corn producer in the Caribbean.
Right.
Can we increase productivity in Belize? Can we expand production in Belize? And then work out the bottlenecks to trade within the Caribbean, because intra-Caribbean trade accounts for only about 0.25% of all that we do. Although Belize produces a lot of corn, they sell it extra-Caribbean.
Yeah.
And so we need to look at internal circulation of what we produce. And this is not to be taken only as a food security threat. It's a total security threat, because without food, you are not going to war, you are not going to work, you are not going to do anything.
Exactly.
And so this should be central to human security thinking in the Caribbean. We take those proactive measures. If you take wheat and products, for example, we have cassava. We are not growing it much. And it's surprising that cassava, the ground provisions do not feature much in our dietary energy.
Yeah.
And this is an area we should begin to look at. Dashin, for example, is one of the most easily digestible starches on the planet.
Absolutely.
And it is used in baby food product because it's of its easy digestibility. How come we are not eating dashin that much, but consuming wheat and those things? We can substitute cassava flour into wheat flour. In Ghana, somebody did it, up to 50% substitution, and you won't feel the difference.
Right.
And in the Caribbean, some rely entirely on cassava flour. But I will not promote that. I will say at the start, let's start thinking about substitution levels and begin to work on these issues going forward.
Because of course it's a behavioral change, and that's going to take some time. But changing dietary patterns, what you're suggesting is going to be critical moving forward, and not even just for finding alternative sources for corn. I mean, so Karl, you mentioned something I thought interesting, and that besides water quality, and that is, of course, weak infrastructure and several ruptured mains. The one thing that really does annoy me, I'm glad that this is on TV, is that you get all these water restrictions, and yet the burst main has been going for the last 3 days, and that water is all wasted. So speak to government and speak to policy, and how do we kind of address things like that? Because obviously if this is a valuable commodity, it shouldn't be running down the street for 3 days, right?
Exactly. Good point. And of course, having that water available and less leakages is important to food security.
Food security, yeah.
Right? But I think just to touch on food security a bit more, I think there needs to be more technology. You spoke about innovation before. There needs to be an embrace of more technology so that there's more smart irrigation scheduling, for example. If we're saying that we're going to be facing more drought and so on. But the infrastructure problem is not an easy fix. The Prime Minister keeps making the point that our infrastructure, some of it was laid down 100 years ago.
There you go.
When the British had an empire. We're a young country. And so it will take billions of dollars, quite frankly, to fix that problem. And this is why the advocacy on the global stage and bringing to bear the world's attention on this climate crisis, we did not cause it, and we have to pay for it.
Yeah,
and so a major burden.
Yeah.
So it will take, and unfortunately, water is a public good, right? So I don't think many private sector investors will be chomping on the bit to invest in water infrastructure.
Yeah.
So, but it means that in terms of, as you said, you can't have water leaking for days and days on end.
If you're saying it's that valuable.
Right, if we're saying it's that valuable,
Yeah.
the response time needs to be a lot
Faster.
faster.
Yeah.
And I think that is part of it. But I think the other thing is using more data to drive decisions.
Which is what we're not doing a good job
Right,
at.
we're not doing a good
Yeah.
job at that because there are some fundamental problems in terms of the whole design of the system, right? So you will continue to see burst mains because if you start with the root cause of not understanding the hydraulics well,
Right.
not understanding that there are fundamental flaws in the system, no matter how much you do in terms of trying reuse and desal to put water in the system, you're going to continue having the same problem. So I think we need to take
you're
a
losing
step
it.
back
Yeah.
and fix some of the more fundamental issues.
And maybe use innovation as well. Now, Kirk, I know that you have used innovation recently, because I watch the news occasionally, to assist us in fires and wildfires, the university as well as the Barbados Fire Service. Do you want to speak some more on that?
Yes, I'll speak on that, but before I do, I wanted to make the connection with what Dr. Payne was talking about in terms of the infrastructure leakage. So there's an actual problem, a wicked problem that occurs in the dry season, a convergence of risk. First, you have low rainfall totals.
Right.
That's not a biggie. Second, what you have is obviously the peak incidence of wildfires. In 2013 was probably the worst. In, I think, March 2013, we had 520 grass fires alone.
So higher than this year?
No. Yeah, well, yeah, for sure.
Wow. This
It
year just
dwarfed.
felt like a hot spot.
Ye-
Literally.
Well, that was not even the tip of the iceberg.
Right,
So that shows you how bad it can get.
Yeah.
No, so those are the two things. Low rainfall, you have wildfires, and this is all within the period from January to about May.
Right.
The third thing is it's the peak burst season. Why? The ground is dry, it cracks, it moves, it puts pressure on these same buried infrastructure. And so at that point in time when you really need water is when you're leaking it the most. And on top of that, the fourth thing is, what's January to May? It's our peak winter season. So that's the intersection with tourism. And we
Increased
know that the
consumption.
demand, yes, precisely,
Yeah.
in terms of demand and consumption. So the Barbados Water Authority is really hamstrung during that specific period of time, especially if we're pushing to expand tourism, because that is going to put inordinate amount of demand pressure on the system, and therefore there's going to be less and less water, and there's going to be less and less, persons are going to be really, really angry that they're not getting the water. But the reality is that's really the system, and that's really the function of climate change and the impact on that.
Yeah.
Now, with regards to the innovation with the fire service, what we sought to do is to try to understand, and Dr. Payne is also working with us on that, and Dr.
Right.
Peter Shamey. We're trying to build systems. So what Dr. Payne had mentioned in terms of data, we need data to assist us. So the fire service was really good at collecting the number of fires, the timing of these fires, and that allowed us to then develop a machine learning predictive model so that we
Artificial
can
intelligence?
correct artificial intelligence, which is Dr. Payne's remit, and be able to forecast wildfires in the future to inform then wildfire management, but also too in terms of the water resource management. Because as a consequence of these wildfires, you have to be able to manage these wildfires by the utilization of water. So the drones will be able to assist the fire service with being able to estimate the size of the fire, because that's a metric that they're currently unable to do.
Right.
So this is helping them to augment their data collection at present and add to it now. And then we will try to look at a model that will be able to tell us where these fires will occur and in terms of the wind direction, et cetera. So we're trying to assist government and these governmental agencies with the ability to be proactive rather than being reactive, because the climate scenario requires you to be proactive rather than being reactive.
I mean, that's a significant innovation. I'm not sure whether this was shared in the public space before, but for a university in a country as we're in now to come up with an innovative way of predicting wildfires, that's something that's critical, because we actually don't have the resources or the water actually to deal with the fire when it occurs, right? So if it's almost like in my neck of the woods, preventative medicine, where you kind of can predict when an event is going to happen and reduce the risk factors.
And what you mentioned there as well is also in terms of when you do have these wildfires, what are the impacts? Because the other piece of innovation that's going to come next month is that we're going to be installing air pollution sensors within the communities and also on campus as well, to be able to understand what the impact of air quality is on the communities, so polyclinics and also schools, because when you have to look at then know what's the exposure levels, what then is the impact on people's health potentially, and be able to use that data now to inform clinical medicine.
Right.
And also, for instance, ER management in the in emergency room. If you have a wildfire, we saw earlier this year where schools had to be closed, businesses had to be closed, so there's a lot of disruption. And when you think even at a social level, what about persons who are disabled?
Right, yeah.
And you have a welfare like that, you know, the person who's blind or deaf. I mean, you have to think holistically of how we're going to move forward as a society to adapt to climate change impacts.
So I know we've been really hashing at artificial intelligence, and it's going to be the thing that's going to cause our complete destruction of the human race if climate change doesn't do so before. But take, for instance, a model of an asthmatic, and this is a real case where you have this online model, and this person is being monitored remotely, and they may be given some medication prompts. Okay, you need to increase your Ventolin inhaler or whatever combination inhaler that you're using and everything, and then using data from air quality, say, okay, so where you are located now, the quality is not going to be that great. So although you feel fine, you need to increase the use of this, or you need to seek medical attention, those kind of things. So data analytics and big data is really where this really is a One Health approach and transdisciplinary, which is what Mike Campbell used this morning that I really enjoyed, because we can no longer manage disease states just looking at health. It's impossible. David, the whole matter of food security, of course, is more critical, I guess, in terms of childhood obesity and what products are available for the future. If we are going to have any chance at addressing our NCD burden, it's really going to have to start with addressing the scourge of childhood obesity and how do you get children eating healthier. This impacts on that, because if you can't for instance, if you have to import a lot of these, you already mentioned, we're not really eating a lot of ground provision. We're eating a lot of ultra-processed foods because they come in cans. How many people in the audience recognize that ultra-processed foods carry an independent risk of cardiovascular events, regardless of how much sodium you're consuming? Or did you know that? And how many of you knew that the number one predictor of type 2 diabetes isn't even sugar consumption, it's ultra-processed meats? So these are things that we need to be conversations we're having to. And the next generation is going to be influenced. That's what I'm saying. So this food security thing is such a big issue for us. What advice would you give to a small island developing state government in terms of early warning signs, if they might be there already, that we should really take food security a bit more seriously?
Well, I think currently almost every country, every government under the sun would tell you that we are serious about food security.
They would say it.
Yes.
They may not be actioning it.
The question is, what are the parameters to be measured to say that we are serious with food security? And so, for example, we have succeeded in putting taxes on sugar-sweetened beverages. We have succeeded in trying to limit the availability of such beverages around schools. But how much success have we had in removing those other food commodities, from the schools and from the homes? If once the food is available, a child only responds to the food environment. And it's important we begin to look at the food environment not only from the supermarket perspective, but also from the home perspective. If it's at home, a child will have it. I say, when I was growing up, you eat breakfast, you walk to school, nobody cares because there's no bus, there's nothing. Daddy doesn't have a vehicle. Mommy doesn't have a vehicle. They're going to their work. You go to school. Right. And you walk to school, you have eaten in the morning, and at the school, nobody has any thought about snack. You do not need it. All you needed was to stay in class until lunchtime. Mm-hmm. You go to the canteen, and the food there is cooked food.
Right.
And you buy your food, eat, play, go and sit down, continue learning, Second break, it's more of water. You drink more water, play, come and finish off, go home and eat.
Yeah.
But these days, we have moved to an era where we are promoting this tendency for diabetes, not just by the food themselves, but also the cultural tax we put on those foods. So if a child sees another child eating something else, that child feels that I am less privileged than this other child. And this is something we should recognize and work on.
Very true.
The cultural value or tax we put on certain food commodities are important. And if we do not put those considerations in our messaging and in our actions to limit exposure to foods that cause diabetes and that cause health problems, we're going to have issues. If you are eating, let's say, fried chicken, and I'm eating beans,
You feel less privileged.
exactly.
Yeah.
But we must begin to promote the idea that the two are not different.
Right.
Both are supplying protein. And what's important is that you are getting protein regardless of where it's coming from.
Kurt, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I was just saying that is really a social construct. We have now the preponderance of cable television. We have the preponderance of the internet, where people go on TikTok, all these different social media outlets. And the devices are really the watering holes for information and also for, quite frankly, decision making for lots of parents and also the children. And so there is the influence of media, and this is visual, audio, in terms of influencing how a person thinks, therefore how they behave. And so years ago, we would run around at primary school, you go get your water or
and
whatever.
drink water.
And I don't
From the
ever
pipe.
remember taking the school snacks.
Yeah.
You're quite right. We had school meals, which is cooked food that would come. You would line up, you get your tray. At break, your break had meal, the powdered milk. But now we've gotten away from that because as a consequence of quote unquote development, we have now progressed to a stage where we believe we should do differently without understanding what differently means in terms of the negative impact.
And the future.
And the future as well,
Exactly.
too.
Carl?
I wanted to chime in as well, because an interesting policy development is in terms of wastewater reuse.
Right.
Water reclamation, essentially, because wastewater is 99% water. And the idea is to take the sewage from Bridgetown and eventually South Coast Treatment Plant and make it good enough. I don't think potable at this point, but for tertiary standards, and make it for agriculture. That's the application. But again, these are such complex issues because what is the risk if you don't quite get it right?
It's also expensive. I mean, it's
expensive too.
for a small
It's hundreds
country.
of millions of dollars.
So what are you talking about at a larger scale? Then what does this mean for a country that really can't afford it?
Right.
This
and,
is
and
where.
then, and then you already alluded to the issues with maintenance and so on.
Absolutely.
So it's expensive. So I'm saying we really need to look at these things in a more comprehensive manner. And I mean, it's could be a good initiative, but I think further down the line, we need to think carefully about the downstream ramifications. But there are some good cases. In Israel, they recycle quite a bit of water.
Yeah.
In California, they have no choice. And I'm glad you spoke about the geopolitical issues, because in the U.S., California is, I think, the largest agricultural producing state. In the Midwest. There are issues with water scarcity. So what does that mean then for food security? So there really needs to be some global collective action to get us out of this crisis. And when you look at something like how the world got together to fix the ozone issue,
Yeah.
right, around chlorofluorocarbons. I think
Right.
we need a similar type global approach because you're seeing the intricate linkages between all of these issues. And if we're not careful, my fear is that someday we wake up in a Barbados where we have to import water from a neighboring island.
A neighboring island.
And I haven't even gotten to the issue of the marine water quality and what's going on with sargassum seaweed and when it decomposes, hydrogen sulfide and the health issues there, and also uptaking arsenic. So these are not
Serious issues.
Yeah.
Kurt, you wanted to add something to that?
Yes. So to connect to Dr. Payne's point in terms of the wastewater and the water reclamation, that is something to help the burden that's placed by agriculture, which is probably the largest sector within Barbados in terms of water demand.
Right.
And Dr. Payne is quite right. We have to get it right. We also have to find innovative ways in which we can fund this in terms of the maintenance. And so we know we have the solid waste and wastewater tax. That is $37.50 that comes in all of our water bills. That is part of it. Now, what we need to, in terms of innovation, is in terms of economic policies. We have to find ways to circularize tourism and trade. They are the two, with the exception of the service industries,
Right.
the two largest sectors within Barbados that drives the ingress of foreign exchange. But at the same time, they also offer vulnerabilities. And for instance, with tourism, we have 285 people that live in Barbados. That's our
Allegedly.
resident population given by the census. Now, we have on record since the year 2000, 1 million tourists that come to Barbados every single year up to 2019. Obviously, with the pandemic, that fell dramatically. But if you look at the quantity of persons coming to our island compared to the resident population, you have 3 times the amount of tourists than you have residents, and residents consume more water than the average household or resident, and they also generate 2 to 3 times more waste. So that is a major problem. How do you still encourage the inflow of all of the tourists to support the tourism industry, but at the same time protect your environment and protect the health of the residents within the islands? That is a major thing that we need to solve, and we need to solve it very quickly, because that will further or exacerbate the degradation of the environment.
Okay, so gentlemen, I am going to open the floor shortly for questions, but before I do so, I want to get your take on what I'm going to describe, not disrespectfully, as the CARICOM experiment, where as a Caribbean community working together to solve a common problem. And we saw a good example of this a few years back. It seems like forever now, but for a pandemic, right, where we all got together in terms of vaccine procurement and all the other things that came about. So the CARICOM experiment can work when there's political will. For each of your areas, what do you think is some of the advice or the benefits you can see from this experiment working well?
Yeah, I can start. And that's a good point. CARFA, the region was able to rally around CARFA. SEDEMA is another CARICOM agency. But unfortunately, in water resources management, things have been, there's not a good governance structure, right?
You mean local governance or
regional governance
right?
Around who should be doing what, who should be at the table, who should be taking the lead on which issues. It is really fragmented, and ad nauseum there's been talk about how to fix these issues. But
So are you saying, Dr. Payne, that in our Caribbean space there isn't a regional body that looks at our entire water environment?
Well, there are some regional bodies that have different remits around water resources
But are
management.
they working? Are they
But
working?
I'm saying that they're not working in a cohesive enough manner.
But that's critical
Which is critical.
because the
right?
water space are all interconnected.
Exactly.
Right.
But I mean, is an issue that needs to be fixed, and I don't think there's an easy solution. But obviously, with the climate crisis, we clearly see that there needs to be some breakthrough in that area. And I mean, the university, we are at the center of producing the cadre of experts,
Climate scientists.
climate and water and land management specialists that then manage the natural resources of these different countries. And there are other agencies involved, but it's not done in a cohesive enough manner to get the breakthrough that we need to really stave off the worst effects of the climate crisis.
And that's probably because the driving force for this probably is not within the academy, but outside of the academy at the level of leadership. David?
Yeah, I think
Food security, CARICOM experiment.
we say in our language, "Benusia omia." So
I'm
when
going to Google that now.
when two persons carry something, it feels lighter. And so it's better that we come together than to bear the same burdens individually. I think it's important that we create specific channels of cooperation in the food sector, in the agricultural sector. As we speak, every single country imports some fertilizer, pesticides, etc. Can we bulk this up, for example, at CARICOM level or a higher supranational body level, so that we can properly regulate and control what comes in? We have just talked about the nitrogen pollution or nitrate pollution of water, whether surface water, groundwater. Mobility of these pollutants in water, in surface water, might be different from groundwater. Barbados relies entirely, almost entirely on groundwater. We can have a regional approach to study the nitrogen balances of our soils and have an integrated framework of nitrogen management. And this can be managed the same way the EU does the CAP or the agricultural framework.
Yeah.
We can do it and then install certain standards across the region. In the paper I talked about with regard to corn import, we were able to identify areas that have better water productivity in terms of corn production as opposed to other areas. So if you are water scarce and you require much more water to produce a ton of corn, it would be better that within a regional framework we look at which countries have better water productivity and the other resources, so that we intensify the production in those areas and then work on redistribution arrangement within the region. Barbados has a better productivity for chicken meat. And in that case, we can circulate the corn. Barbados should have a way to circulate the poultry meat that comes out of it. And we can work this out in a regional framework. And so there are many things we can do, but I have pointed out that in terms of water conservation in agriculture, we can do that. In terms of pesticides and nutrient management, we can do that. And it's important that we get a regional study and a regional framework for this nitrogen balances. And not just nitrogen, but phosphorus as well. But this nitrogen, phosphorus balance that is in there and circulate the products of agriculture.
So that seems like a role of the university.
Yeah, and I totally agree. But there was this interesting study that came out, I think, from either Science or Nature, that we have breached 6 of the planetary boundaries, right? Of course, one is climate. We've used the atmosphere as our dump for our toxic waste. The other one is nutrient discharge, which is a humongous problem associated with agricultural runoff and here poorly designed septic systems. And the other boundary is also in terms of not managing our water usage well enough. So I think there's enough, and we have all of the evidence to show that there are glaring issues here. And I think, as Dr. Yawson is saying, we need some type of cohesive regional framework to look at the interconnections, because you can't talk about water security without talking about food security. The nitrogen issue cannot be decoupled from water and agriculture. And of course, once again, biosecurity and health.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing that really gets this political leadership going is usually a burning platform. You can't want a hotter burning platform than the current climate change that we're going through. COVID-19 is another example of a burning platform. So how do we leverage the burning platform, pun intended, to kind of get a regional approach to air pollution and all the wildfires? I'm sure it's not only affecting Barbados, but several places in Trinidad and other Caribbean countries.
Well, I think it centers around sustainability. A lot of these are intersections that point back to sustainability, whether this is reducing consumer demand or whatever the case may be. But there is a project that we are working on, the Biotrash to Cash project, and that seeks to convert biodegradable waste streams that we have on the island. And so this is us now proffering solutions, because we spoke about the problems
Right.
Extensively, but what are some of the potential solutions that we can bring to the table to have some type of impact? Now, as it relates to the nitrogen loading from manures and also the surface runoff from the excess use of inorganic fertilizers, the NPKs, the problem is a wicked problem for farmers. We historically have had our land in sugarcane production. And with the cycles of sugarcane production, a lot of the cane trash would have been left in the field, so you would get a lot more organic matter going back into the soils. Because now with land use management, we have changed, and persons want to take land out of agriculture. You have a big lot of land, maybe it's a generational thing. Persons before owned it, they passed it on to their children, they have a large plot of land, but now they're looking to make some type of revenue from it, so they're going to wait 10, 15 years for that land to then be converted into residential so they can cut it up into lots. So you have a problem now with the low organic matter. The Ministry of Agriculture has stated that the organic content of our soils is around 2%. No, a healthy soil is around 5%. So we have less than half of what it takes to have a healthy soil. So you're starting off at a deficit. No, that is why you have to use more fertilizer. The plants are weaker, so they get more pest disease, and so you have to use an inordinate amount of pesticides. So it's a continuing cycle that's wicked, and it leads to more and more soil degradation. Also, within the sugarcane industry, what we had was a situation where the cuscus grass had to be removed to allow the mechanization of the sugarcane industry. So when that land shifts from sugarcane production now into something else, there's a lot of soil that's lost as well too, right? So that is a wicked problem. And the solution now that we are proffering is, okay, we have a waste problem on the island. I don't think there's anybody in this room or even online that doesn't see that. So even in the renewable energy push, we believe that the vast majority of our energy demand can be met with bioenergy rather than solar and wind, because solar and wind at the end of the day, at the end of the life cycle of the product, will now create a new waste problem, which is hazardous waste from the lithium-ion batteries and also from the wind turbine blades, because Europe is facing a crisis with those wind turbine blades that are broken and that are at the end of their cycle. They can't put them in landfills. They have to bury them literally in the ground. And these are extremely large pieces of equipment. And so if we then adopt those Eurocentric or global north solutions and try to fit them in our the CIS context, we will face problems. And so we have to be diligent, we have to be intelligent, and we have to be careful what we produce as a solution that doesn't then create future problems. And we see bioenergy as a way to tackle simultaneously waste, generate energy, but also open up new vistas of new economic activity in terms of construction, sustainable concrete. In terms of the pharmaceutical industry, as it relates to health, we could do a lot more in terms of pharmaceutical drug development within the Caribbean, because you have carbon dioxide that's released, and though carbon dioxide is vilified in the climate change conversation, it's an excellent commodity. I'm sure everyone has consumed carbon dioxide at some stage, some fizzy drink you had, whether it be plus, malt, fruity, or any of these. They're all carbonated. They all have carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is a medical gas, so it is just a chemical. We have to be careful not to not sensationalize, but to make it as bad. It's only bad when it's released into the environment, but when you capture it, you purify it, it is an actual good, a commodity that can be traded. And so we have to look at different strategies from different angles. We can't be consumed with what the global north is doing. Yes, we can look at what they're doing, but then we have to internalize it and then develop our own intricate strategies.
So, David, based on what Kirk has just said, even if we were to go back to agricultural land, then you're between a rock and a hard place, literally, because now you have to use all this additional fertilizer and stuff to the land because we have lower levels of fertilizer inherently. So does it even make sense, a country like Barbados even saying, we're going to really go into this agricultural things full steam, or should we be kind of deciding on which Caribbean country is the one that's going to produce?
What I had neglected before David jumps in is that through that biotrash cash, you're going to produce a digestate. So 90 and 95% of all the waste that you put in is going to come out as a fertilizer and a soil amendment.
Right.
So it's going to be able to treat to the soil.
So you can use it as fertilizer, yeah.
Yeah, and it is actually, in terms of the release of the nitrogen, phosphorus, and the potassium, slower. So it gives the plants time to actually absorb, because the plants can only absorb so much.
And it doesn't leak into the water system as quickly, I would assume.
No, and also it adds microbial activity.
Right.
Soil health is really predicated by the microbial activity that's present in the soils. How many people now can go in their kitchen garden, turn the soil,
and find earthworms?
All you're going to find is a lot of centipedes, perhaps.
I found
one
this morning, actually.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why we're talking about a whole holistic planetary. We believe that is a better solution for small island development.
And this has happened in our lifetime, because I remember being at school and doing just that, digging up mud and seeing earthworms. You don't see that you don't see that now. I'm not ignoring the online audience, and I know that we only have 10 more minutes. But this question really struck me from one of the online audience members, and I guess this can go to the entire panel. Are we not just living in a hopeless situation? Is there really in other words, the speed at which you are describing the solutions need to be, is it even possible? That came from online. I didn't make that up.
Yeah, it's such a difficult and
let me just say before, while you think about the answer, I get this all the time in health, and I have to pause and think, can you even really address the NCD crisis, or this is something that we're just destined to continue a spiral? So
I think actually my colleagues have proffered, and you have previously proffered, various solutions. Find some champions. That is what we've been doing at the university, and there will be some interesting initiatives announced. We're going to be using things like artificial intelligence to help with smart
So that's one, technology, champion, research. Anything else?
Policy as well.
Policy, political leadership buy-in, of course, is important. And I guess considering the geopolitical context as well, because whatever we do in this part of the region is going to be influenced from what's happening outside. And the other question that is easier is someone is just amazingly alarmed at the amount of corn that we are importing from the USA. Is that correct? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, so the question is, well, I guess it's just uncomfortable with the amount of corn that's being imported from one country, whether it's the US or wherever, because it seems that it makes us so vulnerable. I mean, suppose tomorrow that country decides, we have just decided we're not exporting any more corn. Like, it decided during the pandemic, we are not going to send you any ventilators. Then what?
Yeah, I mean, we saw that during the pandemic that food insecurity shot up sharply in the Caribbean. I think the WFP study showed that it went up by over 50%.
50%, yeah.
In the Caribbean. And this was simply due to supply chain disruption.
Right.
And it's because we need the corn, we need the wheat,
and we saw this in the supermarket during the pandemic, things that were just no longer available.
Yeah, so that is when you are right, you persons begin to think of food security. But otherwise, at the moment, you go and find what you need or want. So there's no food security problem.
Yeah.
But there is a problem with it, at least at the strategic level. And what you described is true. The paper is online, and it's
right.
open access paper. So you can find this paper. For some countries, more than 99% from the USA.
Right.
It's high risk.
That is scary.
It's high risk,
yeah.
and it is true. So the data is there.
Right.
And we need to proactively begin to diversify that base. But the first question you asked about whether we are in a hopeless situation, I think that
because it sounds that way.
Yes. I say that hope is as good as life itself. And without hope, there is no meaning to life. And there is no need for life. And so we cannot accept the fact that we are in a hopeless situation. As long as there is life in us, it's humans that engineered everything we see around us. It's humans we can engineer ourselves out.
Right.
What I think should be the central piece here is a kind of boldness or courage, which Maya Angelou says that is the highest of all virtues.
Right.
Recently, we have seen France destroy tons of wine just to save the France wine market and the farmers. What can we do to support our local farmers within the framework of WTO, whatever? How much courage can we have to say that we are not going to import this or this scale of this, but regardless of the pain, we're going to support local farmers to do it. And because there is market for it, we can then begin to impose standards on them. And that is doable because all those countries will aspiring to their level do the same thing.
They do the same thing, yeah.
It's courage that is needed. It's not the solution itself that is far-fetched. But what we need is courage. And we should be courageous, I believe, in terms of also establishing our cultural identity. Food is a very important part of cultural identity. And the Caribbean must not lose its cultural identity in the melting pot of tourism.
Right.
Because we're importing something for tourists, we should not lose the fact that we are breadfruit eaters.
Right.
And somebody in Barbados must commercially produce breadfruit rather than think of all the time producing those foreign products. We must begin to think of seed systems because we say back home, if you don't have a seed, you don't have food. But the moment we begin to give away our seed system, and every little crop, we have to import the seed. Those seeds have been bred for specific conditions. Once they come here, they need intensive inputs. And that begin to give us all the problems with pests, with nutrient requirement, with water requirement, etc. If we can go back and build our seed system, that is the foundation of recapturing our food system. Thank you.
Thanks. That has been, quite an eye-opener for me. This whole panel has been, by the way. We haven't even gotten to touch on one area that I wanted to bring up, which is antimicrobial resistance and the dumping of antimicrobials in the environment and the impact that has on veterinary medicine, human health, and the environment. But guess what? We're almost out of time. So I'm going to ask each of you for a 60-minute summary thoughts. 60 seconds. It's time for lunch.
That's okay. Well, to continue from Dr. Yawson's point, in terms of the impact of climate change on the supply chain, let's look at Panama. The Panama Canal is a vital logistic link between for the Caribbean. That country is currently experiencing a drought to the point where the canal is actually reducing the number of ships and also the number of containers per ship, which means you have delays in excess of 21 days or more on either side of the canal. That is a problem for us. So we have to be better in terms of our management of the supply chains, more climate resistant. This is at the level of enterprise, businesses, but also government as well. And so we are also developing a potential solution for that. It's called the Climate Resilient Artificial Intelligence Trade Platform, being able to estimate what the demand is in country, also what the supply is externally, and being able to fit both of them. But I think the key to this, in terms of raising the hope, is to design better systems, because the ecosystem is a larger system, but we need better systems within the ecosystem to help us to effectively manage it.
And measure.
And measure it.
Yeah. Go ahead. Carl, you want to go ahead?
Sure. I think inherently we as humans are altruistic, and so we want to pass on a better earth and environment to future generations. So I think we have to find, as David is saying, the willpower to move forward. And don't waste the opportunity, as Dr. Douglas is saying, of a crisis. Yeah. Because there are going to be pockets of innovation happening out of every crisis. Yeah. We saw it in COVID, and we're going to see it in this climate crisis. There's going to be a whole wave of climate entrepreneurs that will drive innovation, and I hope we can start with the University of the West Indies at the 60th anniversary, moving forward and being ground zero for that innovation.
Well said. David?
Yes, I reiterate the fact that what happens under climate change in other countries will certainly affect us, and we should begin to consider that in our adaptation policies and measures. I'm also going to say that as small and developing states, we do not have a lot of resources, land, water, etc., to produce a lot of food. That requires prioritization of what we produce and what we eat. And that prioritization must be drilled into the DNA of every child, every person within the islands of the Caribbean. I will say that let us prioritize 1 or 2 dietary energy food crops that we prioritize. Everybody should be able to access that, regardless of your income status. As the advanced countries have done with potato and wheat, every person can easily access that and get energy. And we must prioritize 1 protein at least. 1 animal-based protein, 1 plant-based protein, and prioritize the production of that. And that will be a base of our food security. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And on that note, I certainly have prioritized what I'm going to have for lunch, a breadfruit bowl. So we are now to the end of the second panel, and this has been such an engaging conversation with not only our climate scientists, but earlier the population scientists. The University of West Indies has been bringing to you live from the E.R. Waldron Clinical Skills Building this hot topic Act 60 to commemorate our 60th anniversary as an existing indigenous university in the Caribbean space, responding to the needs of Caribbean civilization and Caribbean people, which at this point in time involves climate change. You've seen the last 3 panelists here on stage, Dr. Douglas, Dr. Yawson, and Dr. Payne, and previously we had Dr. Herwood, Dr. Mike Campbell, and Dr. Joy St. John. I am Kenneth Connell, and I have been your moderator. I want to close by thanking all those members of the university community who have made sure that this program came off, including the members of In Place, the Cayfield campus, as well as UWI Marcom. Special thanks also to the Faculty of Science and Technology and CERMES, as well as the Center for Biosecurity Studies, and of course, the Faculty of Medical Sciences for hosting this event. Most importantly, special thanks to you, the audience, for joining us here in the university space. We are hoping to see you at your university sometime this week or even next month, and possibly even on October 14th at the Grand Gala. Tickets available from the bookstore. Now, if you are out there in the heat, move out of the heat, go into the shade. Also, drink some water, and thirdly, check your urine. It should be clear if you're hydrated. Stay safe and tune in to another 60th anniversary event coming to you soon. Thank you.